everybody. Welcome to the Northeast Alabama Community College Softball Show with Coach Joe Guthrie. Running a couple minutes late, little technical issues, but I think it may be because of the storms that are coming through. So we're going to go ahead and get started and get as many questions in with Coach Guthrie before the storms get here and get us all knocked out. Coach, as always, thanks for joining us. Thanks for taking the time. And uh, kind of we were talking before we went live, I kind of asked you the question that I had and a lot of other people. You finally, unfortunately, got that loss, 19-1. But does that take pressure off of you and the girls as far as finally having that first loss?
Yeah, not really. I mean, it's, I don't really look at it as pressure or not pressure. It's just, are we doing what we need to do to get better? The thing that we've got to, the lesson out of that game, but not just that game, we had it, earlier in the week. You can't play catch up over and over and over and over again and not expect to get burned at some point. So, those are lessons for coaches, for players, because from here on out, we're getting everybody's best shot. And that's something we've got to learn. And it's a fast learning curve because, we've kind of gone from an unknown to, the top of the rankings or among the top of the rankings. And, we're not the only one that looks at that. And, you're going to expect, everybody's best game. So, the little things become amplified. It's actually, something we're going to have to, get on pretty quick because in conference, it really doesn't matter. You're going to get everybody's best shot anyway. The records don't matter in conference. Conference have a there's just more to play for. So, we're looking forward to it and continuing to address it and practice and just get better.
One more quick thing, and then I'll turn you over to Phil. Looking at the stats on here, 19-1, as I said, it's still a great start and still a long ways to go, though. But the one thing that sticks out to me, or the two things, is one on the offensive side, 27 home runs. Was you expecting that much power this early in the season?
For me, just our run production has been good at times. That's part of it. We've done it. We did a nice job in that game when we didn't have the home run to utilize, some of the short game opportunities. I thought the kid in Roan did a really good job in front of us in the first game. And, we had to bunt, I think 5 times, to manufacture runs, and we did a good job. And that's going to happen, when you're facing really good pitching. So, all those things kind of add up. We're just trying to find ways to score runs. Obviously we got to do a better job with the runner at third. That's something we haven't done great. Really at any point during the year, we have a goal. We want to execute that at 70%. And we're below that right now. And that's the easiest one to score for a myriad of reasons, but we've got to do a better job there for sure. That was particularly early in the game.
And then the other questions on the defensive side, pitching wise, 2.24. How pleased are you with that 2.24 this early in the season?
I think we've still got to get some folks some opportunities. We're still looking for some, combination matchups. That have been pleasing in practice, and we're going to flip some things around, going forward to try and utilize our depth a little more. But yeah, that's pleasing. And I didn't think we played very good defense. I think it was on Wednesday when we played Georgia Highlands. I thought that was just okay. We pitched very well, obviously with 2 shutouts, but we had some defensive mistakes. I thought we played pretty good defense, honestly, better defense, against Roan. It's a very good defensive team. There's a high standard, and our group, continues to, pride themselves on that and continue to get better. We had a lot of people out today doing work. Defense and base running are going to allow you to win the games that are close margins. And obviously we're going to have a lot of those coming forward, by virtue of the fact that we're in conference and then, postseason play after that. So, those things have to, you're going to hit sometimes. You're going to, you hope you're pretty steady pitching wise, but the defense and base running has got to be constant. For the most part, it has been. We've just got to clean some things up in some other areas for sure.
Phil, after this last question, turn it over to you. Which would you rather have more consistent, the bat or the pitching?
Well, I think your pitching's where the wins come from. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, you can't do anything without that. Hitting will not ever be as consistent. We've done a nice job thus far, but it's never going to be. You've seen that a couple times. We faced some really good pitchers. You saw it against McLennan. You saw it against Walters. You saw it against Roan. Even the first game at Georgia Highlands was tight early. Um, you know, when you're facing an ace, you've got to adjust to that, and you're going to get everybody's best shot. And some of the plans that we've had in there, you got to remember there are times we'll have 7 freshmen, on the field, and that's an adjustment factor offensively that they're not. It's not taught as much as it used to be, and so them kind of learning situational hitting, is a steeper learning curve than it used to be because it's just not something that's drilled in their heads anymore. They understand mechanics pretty well. They understand body movements pretty well, but they don't understand that nearly as well as they did 10 or 15 years ago. So that's a work in progress. It takes patience. It's not something that really you can blow up on them on. There's just got to be a discipline and execution. And the nice thing with the depth we have offensively, if it's not somebody's day, we can get somebody in there that can pick up the slack. We're pretty deep in that area, so all those things are positives going forward.
Phil.
Okay, well, Coach, going back, since I was there, I got to see the game against Rome State. Of course, they had some good swings at Addie. Addie did a great job. I mean, she didn't have the strikeout total she did, but there were some good defensive plays played behind her. I know Perkins and Acuff and McCluskey made some big plays to help. Kind of the defense behind her really helped her in that game.
Yeah, and you've got to do that. That's going to continue to happen as teams. Addie's not going to throw a no-hitter every day. She throws strikes that even on her day that's not as good. I thought on that particular day she spun the ball up pretty well. The changeup wasn't as good as it has been at times. And her kind of the low rise aspect we used in the curveball wasn't as sharp. So the nice thing, Courtney and I have been together a long time, and our pitching and defense are very much married up into how we shift, how we do things. We try to teach our kids. Lorelei Sullivan made a really, really big play early in that game and got the kid caught one on the barrel. I can't remember the count. Pretty good left-handed hitter that they had, and she dropped the wrong way, readjusted, and caught it. I think that ball's probably a triple if she doesn't. Mm-hmm. And those are things that we work on. It's good to see a young player make a play like that in a moment, because that it looks like a great play, but that's a different ball game. She doesn't catch that. So, a lot of good. I thought in that game or those games, period, I thought we played championship level defense. We just didn't do it in some other areas, but yeah, that part was really good for sure.
Well, of course, the game you did lose, you were down 5-1, actually came back, took the lead at 6-5, but you had opportunities to kind of sort of, in a sense, I guess you could say, stomp on their throat and put the game away. Because in the final line score, I think y'all left 8 runners on base. They left 3. They were down to their last strike, hit a solo home run, and then another home run to take the lead. So it was one of them, you didn't quite get them put away, and you left them in it.
And that's where the runner at third piece I was talking about, that has not just been that game. We just have not done a very good job of that all year, and we'll have to do better, going forward. We've got to find some other, at times we use short game a couple times to punch across runs with a runner at third. That's good. But, against a team like that, you'd like to have a crooked number because it gives you breathing room, because you're not going to, there, as we saw late in the game and saw really throughout the course of the day, that's a really good offensive team. They've got a mix of speed and power, which can be tough to defend at times. So, that piece is definitely, proud of our kids, the way they responded. I told them after the game, I didn't think, if you're going to go down, Lowe had a 2-out, shot to the third baseman. If that ball's a foot either way, it's probably a triple. So I got no issue with the way that we competed in the game. after we dug ourselves a hole, with the exception of, like you mentioned, we had runner at third opportunity twice, when we were up 6-5. Those are key. And it's a big difference, if you get a run or two, and I think sometimes when you had a lot of success offensively, that this game is full of, momentum shifts, awareness moments, situational moments where you've got to be dialed in right then. And we've just got to get better. So they're going to pop up, throughout the course of the year. But, sometimes just laying up, putting the ball on the ground through the middle is it doesn't go down as sexy, but it wins games. And, we talked to our group about, being the victor versus the hero. If you got bases loaded and 2 outs and you're down a run, the ball in the air doesn't do much for you. And it's not a high percentage deal. We used to chart that, back when I was in pro ball, and, it's like 13% of high loft balls in the air are hits. And those are the balls off the wall, over their head, and out of the yard. That's not high percentage. It's the ones that get all the ink and attention, but it's not high percentage. The line drives, something like 90% of those with decent exit velocity are hits. And even the high exit velocity, ground balls are hits unless they're right at somebody. So understanding when to go to the air, understanding when to go to the ground, understanding what's in front of us, being aware in those moments, helps us execute when we need to late. And those are things that we're going to dial in and get better at for sure.
Yeah, that's one of them where you, in a certain time, you have to find your pitch in a situation. Sometimes the hitters, have to find that, go away with a ball that's outside because you want to hit it on the ground or go opposite field. So, well, Coach, I know we had talked about this. You won 19 in a row, finally lost one, and kind of the way I took it, and people on the outside kind of think that it's pressure, it's and it, you kind of sort of maybe get caught up in all that stuff. But when I played, you don't get caught up in those things. You just play for the next moment. The 19 wins was nice. You're fixing to go into conference play. Yes, those games are part of your character, or part of what you are right now. But now it kind of starts over. But, I think the players, to me, you see the number 3 ranking, they take that into perspective, because really all that really means is you have got respect. And of course, that's nice to have, because that means people know who you are.
Yeah, I mean, we're just trying to be the best versions of ourselves every day. One of the lessons that comes out of that game is, statistically, we made 0 errors. I think they made 3 or 4. The odds of, I think Aaron had a 0.59 ERA coming in. It ballooned all the way up to 0.88, after the home run. So, she's obviously done a really good job. Warnock did just a fantastic job. She's a big reason why we were in the game. We scored runs, yes, but if it hadn't been for her carrying water in the middle of that game, she gave us everything she had. I was very proud of her. We had one pitch we'd like to have that call back as coaches. I'm sure she'd like to have it back. But in terms of what she did in the game, I mean, I just can't say enough. And she's done, quite a lot in the last 3 weeks. Just really proud of her performance and her ability to work through adversity. I think she's come a long way in that regard for sure.
Well, one thing I noticed too, we talked about how well the team played defensively against Roan State, but the pitchers played well. They defended their circle very well. There was a lot of hard hit balls back toward the mound, and they made every play.
Kaylee's really improved. She's a really good defender. Addie's a really good defender. We've got some that are getting better. And typically in our programs, you'll see them make a big leap from year 1 to year 2. Unfortunately, even at the highest levels, that's not something that's spent a lot of time on. Our pitchers know they're gonna feel their position, because it allows us to do other things. If a Kaylee or an Addie is bouncing off the mound, and usually they are, that allows us not to have to send 3 gloves in. We don't have to worry about coverages. So, if they run something differently, we can set up for a double play. We can set up for a fake bunt and run, without having to give away too much on the defensive side. So, a good fielding pitcher is really valuable. And, we've got a couple of them, and we run a lot of different looks. We shift a lot. I mean, anybody that's seen us knows that. But that certainly is a weapon for us because I've beaten teams in the past. I've been beaten in the past where, the pitching aspect of defense wasn't very good. So I'm glad to see that out of our pitchers for sure.
Yeah, and very nice. It was very valuable in that series against Roan State. Well, Coach, going forward, I mean, I get to see the lineups, watch a lot of the ball games. Is everything going forward kind of sort of going to be the way it has been? Are you planning to kind of interchange things a little bit? I know you kind of sort of spoke on that. Uh, what are the plans going forward? I guess you've pretty much seen everything you're going to see out of this team because, really when you get to conference play, you got to play your best.
Yeah, we've got a lot of best, and I think we're still trying to find I always have a saying, there's your 9 best that might be your most talented individuals. And then what is your best 9? And our best 9 changes a little bit. We've got looks for certain things defensively. We've got looks for certain things offensively. There's a lot of kids on this team that can play. There's several kids that if they were on other teams, they'd be starting and hitting over 300, which is tough for us, and so, we're still working on, we've got there's a couple kids, Kaylee's kind of a different look as a pitcher. We've got some kids, obviously, in Addie and Aaron that can go up. We need to find kind of a consistent down, and there's a couple kids that I think can do that for us, about 3 that, we're going to need to flip because Addie and Aaron and some of the ones that have carried water aren't going to be able to carry that same kind of water as we get deep into the year. So, we've still got a long way to go. There's 32 games left. I thought our kids in roles, particularly in the game against Georgia Highland the other day, Savannah Cantrell came in and had a big double. She's done a good job as a pinch hitter. She spot started for us. She's going to be a really good player. She's just young. And, some of our veteran players like Murphy and Walding have done some good jobs, in the past as pinch hitters. All that's going to be valuable. Pearl Bellamy has done an outstanding job running the bases for us. We ran the safety squeeze the other day. She ran that about as well as you could possibly run it. It's not an easy play to run. It's not an easy play to defend, as you saw. Takes a lot of discipline by the bunter, the runner at third, the runner at first, to execute all that right. And, I was pleased that, we were able to do that pretty well. Kylie Weston's gotten down 2 squeezes for us. It's a big deal. So, all that stuff is going to be valuable. Because, if we're fortunate enough to get to a championship play type of deal, I can guarantee you this: we won't win it or lose it 15-0. It'll be something that's around the margins. So, I thought we did a pretty good job of that. I thought, the shutdown innings, what we call, when we score, they don't. We're pretty good for the most part. Obviously, late, not so much. In the one game, but answer innings were pretty good. When they score, we score back. We did a pretty good job of that. We got to do a better job throughout the week when we get to what we're calling a countdown situation, which is we've got to lead late. The idea is to get 1, 2, 3, and we're done. And that kind of, marries into momentum. I thought little things. In the first game, we won it 4-1, but we had we got pulled off at first base. And, that goes down as a little thing. It doesn't on paper hurt you, but it does leave that little bit of momentum, going into a series or a doubleheader where it's like, hey, they're still hanging around. And those are the things that we're going to continue to address and get right. Because there's a way you want to win where you're not opening a door. And every team we play, like I've said, multiple times on this show and others, we don't really play a bad team on our schedule. We've got a really good Calhoun team coming in, this week. And, they handle the bat really well. They're going to pitch it. They're well coached, and they're going to put some pressure on us and some things that we've got to be sharp on for sure. So, all that it becomes more important as the season continues.
Well, yeah, and speaking of Calhoun, as we move into that, I want to ask you about Jimmy, but kind of since you've addressed Calhoun, they're a team. They don't have a lot of power numbers, but you see a lot of doubles, triples, walks, stolen bases. So they're a team that's going to put pressure on you.
Yeah, they're going to do that. The best way that A, we want to defend it. B, if we can start fast, they're not a team that catches crooked numbers as much. There's lots of ways to do that. Our team has a, pretty good balance between power and speed and the ability to go short game. So we want to make sure we're scoring early and often, because I think that, puts them in a deeper hole as long as we continue to pitch and defend. So, we'll see how that goes. But yeah, they're a good team. They're well coached. There's a lot more ways for them to beat you, I feel like, this year than in years past. And, it's an exceptional conference this year. I think, I sit on the committee for rankings. We make our recommendations and send it over to the NJCAA, and then they come out with a poll every Monday. And, I don't remember, and I haven't been in the league consistently since 2007. I had a 10-year break, obviously, in Division I, but throughout that knowledge, unless I'm wrong, it's 6 years at Marion, and then I've been here for 3 with a 10-year hiatus in between to the higher levels. I don't remember a time where 3 teams in our conference were nationally ranked, and that is true today. I think that's a credit to the league. And by the way, there's another 4 that are knocking on the door. They're right in that 35 to 60 range. So, that's a testament, I think, to the coaches in the state, the presidents and the ADs that have put resources into what we're doing in junior college softball in Alabama. And it should be a really fun year. I think there's going to be some really good games. I mean, like I said, I don't remember a time when we've had that many nationally ranked teams, and then some others that are very, very good teams that are right on the edge of that. So it's going to be a fun year for sure.
Well, Coach, I want to ask you about this. Of course, Jimmy Colitis went to Columbia, helped coach the national softball team. I know they did. I think they finished 5th place, I think is what I saw. How, give us a little bit. How was his trip? I'm sure he enjoyed it, but is it good to have him back? You kind of had a missing link. Is it good to have him back?
Yeah, I mean, you're always going to have, things that change during a season. Fran Lump was gone for a week, had a family illness in Germany. There's going to be, there's going to be injuries. There's going to be kids that, roll in and out of lineup. I mean, there's going to be coaching staff stuff. The opening weekend, our daughter got sick and Courtney wasn't there, when we opened up down in Marion. So we had to adjust that on the fly. There's always going to be little things, just stuff, that comes up. But certainly Jimmy's he's a very respected coach. He's one of the best hitting guys, one of the best recruiters in the country. He's been doing that for 20 years. I don't have to go through his resume to go through that. But, yeah, it's always good to have him back. He balances out the staff pretty well. And, I think, the Columbia thing is big for the school. I know Jim, I don't want to speak for Jimmy, but I'm sure he would agree with this. It's very generous of Dr. Campbell to allow. It's a big prestigious honor to get to, be named as one of the coaches. Jimmy's the only guy I know that he's in the coaching pool for both, men's and women's. Back during December, he went down and did an eval down in Florida for the women's, the upcoming prospects. They're continuously evaluating those players to try and make the national team, as good as it can be. He's part of that process. He's coached the big team in the past. Of course, he and I have done stints together in the pro league. But yeah, going over to the men's side, it's a great game. It was, about 2 or 3 generations ago, pretty wildly popular, especially in the upper Midwest. For some reason, I would love to see it come back, because if you've ever seen the men, it's a really, really, really fun game. It's super fast. And, I'm glad he's a part of that. There's some people that we know that, recommended him. He got in, he kind of did a couple practice sessions with those guys, back during the fall, and, it worked out for him to go. And it's a young team that they've got, and I don't think they were expected to medal, but they qualified to go on to the next series of championships. So, all those are good. And, I think it's a big deal for our school to see that kind of recognition, out of somebody from our staff. So, again, I appreciate, Dr. Campbell and Jimmy, kind of stepping forth and doing that. So it's a big deal for us for sure.
I just wondered, maybe if someday that if it got to be popular again in this country, you could have a exhibition around here. That would be nice to create some more interest again. Because really, even in slow pitch softball, I played for years. It has really went downhill. Not as many people
Yeah.
play slow pitch softball, even in men's leagues anymore.
Yeah, there are a lot of guys that were, my grandfather's gone now, but he grew up in Missouri, and in that region, the Great Lakes area, when you get into Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois, wildly popular. He used to talk to me about, and this was kind of my intro. I didn't even really know what fast pitch softball was. I remember him telling me when I was a little kid that he would play for town teams that they had, you'd have the biggest employer in town sponsored a team. It was kind of semi-pro. He would play for that. I remember him telling me about pitching 3 games in one day. This is in the 40s, and just really cool stuff. There used to be a troupe and they may still be around. There was a guy named Eddie Feiner that had the king in his court. I think he's gone now.
Mm-hmm.
But,
Yes.
it'd be him and 2 other guys, and they tour all over the country. And, I think, Eddie was kind of part of that generation. The first guy that gave me a job at Marion Military Institute in fast pitch softball, Colonel Jim Benson, who was a Vietnam era vet, also played, college football and baseball in college. And he picked up, men's fast pitch back in the 60s, playing for the Marine Corps. And so that was kind of an interesting. He had a lot of good stories, when I worked for him. But yeah, it'd be cool to see it come back. If you've ever seen it on men's or women's side, but it's a lot of fun, obviously. So very much a kind of a pitcher defense game right now, because those guys are throwing 85 miles an hour at 43 feet. It's pretty. That's really tough stuff. When we talk about the velocities going up in Major League Baseball, that's really difficult to do anything with. So a lot of fun, pretty phenomenal athletes. We've got some of the best men's players. Mike White, that's at Texas, was a phenomenal, like a Michael Jordan type pitcher back in the day. And I have a lot of respect for him. Jimmy worked for him for 5 years at Oregon. We're big fans of Whitey. But a lot of people don't know that story. He came over here, as a pitcher, first in New Zealand, then over here, and and then ended up working at Oregon as his assistant, and then took the head job, and now is at Texas. But yeah, he has a really extensive background in the men's game, and I've worked camp with him in the past. It's pretty cool to hear his stories on, kind of how all that went about, and it like you said on the shrinkage piece, unfortunately, even since I've been in the game, the men's fast pitch optic has dwindled. And I hate that, because it's just a really cool sport, and a lot of fun to watch if you haven't ever seen it.
Yeah, I'm definitely sure. Well, Coach, if I'm not mistaken, I think a lot of time while Jimmy was gone, Sierra Walding, I think a lot of times filled in and coached first base. Does she have a coaching future?
Well, she's one of the reasons we did that is, Sierra, her dad runs Arizona Storm Walding, out in the Phoenix area. And that's a really good organization, one of the best in the country. And, I've gone up to see him because her little sister is coming to us next year. And, Sierra, it's very much a family deal with those guys. And Sierra's done that quite a lot. So that was one of the reasons we did it. OA, Olivier Cup's done it some. Pearl's done it some, just as a veteran player that knows what we're trying to do. OA being, a high IQ kid. She's one of the smarter kids I've had. Just about every day she says something on the field that I'm like, I didn't know she knew that, and I didn't know she had the knowledge to kind of think through it. She's a very smart kid. And Sierra obviously is too, both academically and on the field. So yeah, that's kind of how that went about. But yeah, Sierra's had some pretty extensive experience doing that. When I go see him in the fall and the summer, watching that team because of her sister Kaylee, Sierra's, the whole family's involved. She's got a sister that plays at, Charleston Summer Southern, that comes out and helps her dad out as well, and who's a really good player. So, it's not her first time doing that for sure.
Well, you speaking of Olivia Acuff in that game over the week, or actually Thursday, I think it was. She made a super defensive play on a line drive. It was a difficult catch. I mean, I don't know how she got to the ball. She didn't dive for it, but somehow, some way, it found her glove. It's one of those plays where it looked like you don't coach that kind of play. It's just she had a feel for it and made the play.
Yeah, she's not a kid. Like when you watch Perkins, Perkins, the foot patterns, the glove patterns, all that is pretty silky. OA, and this is not a shot at OA. That's not really what OA does. OA is just one of those. It doesn't look that pretty when she does it, but what she does is she just has a nose for the ball, and you can't teach that. She knows what she's trying to do with it. The other day we were running some situations out of a shift, and we've got what we call a bracket over on the pool side of the field, between three defenders, the left fielder, the shortstop, and the third baseman, and then the second baseman has the middle. And OA made the comment to me in the middle of practice. She goes, "I think we should come across the bag to turn this double play, because when Mo catches it, she's in the same place Marty is, just on their length and where they're at on the field." And I hadn't even thought of that. And I just went over and we looked at it. She's right. That's a big time, like, heads up, type of thought that you don't get very, very often. I mean, she's very smart, very in tune with what the game is telling her to do. And I'm just really happy she's here. But, just a positive energy kid that, gets up and does her job every day. So really, really pleased with her for sure.
Well, two other players I want to talk about on the defensive side: Chloe Hatch in left field, and then Kylie Weston in center field. Sometimes you kind of sort of take them for granted. It just they make difficult plays look easy.
Yeah, our corner outfielders have gotten a lot better at understanding, for example, balls with high loft and you're playing the corner, they're going to spin toward the line, so they open up toward the line. Chloe's improved tremendously. Defense is not the best thing that she does, and I'm not saying that as a shot to her. She's very fast. She's improved quite a lot. Her arm strength was not something when she came here that was a strength, and she has gotten quicker with it and more accurate with the ball and understands where we're trying to go. So, I think all those things are to her credit. Kylie's a really good player. Kylie, I don't have to put my hands on the center fielder a lot. She understands what we're trying to do with shifts and angles and makes good throwing decisions. She's improved a lot in the game. And, obviously, I can't say enough about, I mean, she's run down, I don't know how many balls in the last 2 years. Really good player. And, both those kids are going to be really good players at the next level. And they're getting a lot of interest from, other schools going forward. So, I'm real pleased with them. That's to their credit. They deserve it. They've worked hard. So, we're going to miss those guys next year for sure. And they've been good examples, for the Bree Wilsons and the Lorelei Sullivans, that are coming up. And I think they would tell you this: they wouldn't be playing in part at the level they're at, without those other older kids. So just really pleased the way that's all worked out.
Yeah, and another one that's kind of quietly, to me, had a pretty good season is Emery Burke.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another just fantastic kid. I mean, it's kind of a little bit of a good personal story for me. We signed Emery out of high school at UAB. We ended up leaving. She didn't get a lot of time at UAB the 2 years she was there. Went up and played in the Scenic City Collegiate League. This year, honed her skills. Very hard worker. Emery can play short. She can play second. She's a really, really good second baseman. She's got a really strong arm for a second baseman. Today we're doing situations in practice. She's gotten a lot better on the long relay throws at being accurate on those, which are going to come into play later. That's something we've got to continuously work on. But yeah, good player. And the bat, is about what we thought we were getting. She was, I think, 5A hitter of the year, her last year in high school out of Boaz. And, we knew it was there. We just, polishing off the edges. She's done a better job of, understanding, when to adjust and not just be a one swing, one plane kid. And, I think she's bought into that and done a really good job. So I'm real pleased with Emory. And again, that's another kid that is going to make somebody happy next year for sure.
Yeah, it's a great group, and and I know when y'all kind of interchange folks, you don't have much drop off, you know, defensively or offensively. This is a pretty solid group, and they're only going to get better. Well, Coach, next, this coming Thursday, you go to Calhoun over to Tanner, Alabama to play. Tell us kind of what the routine day is going to look at. It's not a very long trip, probably one of your shorter ones of the year. How's the day going to look?
Yeah, we usually will typically, on the shorter ones, we'll have some BP and some extra work, defensively and offensively at our place, and then hit the road and go. We may do that this time around because it's close. And then everything else pretty much stays within a regulated routine, in terms of pregame. But yeah, it's kind of nice having it. It's one of the beauties of this. There are some leagues like that, at the higher levels, what I call bus leagues, where you can drive and play your games and come back. It's a lot better than what we had to deal with when I was at Conference USA at UAB. I mean, your furthest eastern opponent is Marshall. It's in West Virginia, and your furthest western opponent is UTEP in El Paso. And that's tough. I mean, you're talking about flying where you got to go. There's road fatigue. There's turnaround series sometimes back to back. That are far away. I think our furthest south team was Miami during FIU in Miami. So those are hard. Those are hard for kids trying to make classes. They're hard. Keeping up with assignments. They're hard on your bodies. And not that this isn't, but it is nice to kind of be able to bust it for sure.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So, well, Coach, it's a big time, and I said, no. Last year, this team kind of struggled on the road, so I guess that's a point of emphasis because if you're going to win a conference championship, those road games are very important. Anytime you can steal one, especially when you leave the field and win that nightcap.
Yeah, I mean, we played really well on the road with this team. It's a completely different team, obviously, than a year ago. I think that says a lot to their grit. I think we played, honestly, probably better on the road this year, and that includes the fall, than maybe in the home games. And that had a lot to play into what we were doing in the fall. Of we had probably as challenging a road trip in junior college softball, throughout the course of the fall as anybody, and that was definitely planned. Because if you can handle Louisiana and go on the road and beat Louisiana Tech, after I think we put in about almost 24 hours total at driving, then you should be able to handle these road trips without excuses. So I think all that helps. But yeah, I mean, we're still playing against the game, no matter where we are, and hopefully we continue to embrace those challenges both home and away for sure.
Well, tell me this, Coach. We don't get to talk about this a lot. What do the girls kind of do to kind of occupy their time when the trips are not very long? Do they listen to music, do a little study work? What are the kind of the things they do to kind of kill some time?
Yeah, some of all that. A lot of them like to sleep. That's something that college kids need, and I'm not a huge believer of getting them up 5 a.m. all the time. I think some of that thinking is kind of medieval a little bit. If you look at a lot of the studies I've seen, they need sleep, and they will be sleep deprived simply because it's college and they're a college athlete. No matter what time you play, it's just a lot of hours. So you know, uh, they're going to get it when they can. We usually always wake them up, 30 minutes prior to, getting there because we want their bodies awake and kind of up and ready to go rather than just, getting up and going from there. So yeah, all those are kind of things you have to weigh in, on road trips and whatnot as you go forward.
Yeah, I guess it's one of them. If their bodies want to crash, you let them crash.
Yeah, I think that the at that point in their lives, development wise, sleep is not. I'm not somebody that thinks that you can't sleep and and that kind of thing. I think you need it when you can, and recovery is a big deal, in our sport, because it is a grind, no doubt about it. So, those things we definitely factor into what we're doing.
Well, I'm going to turn you over to Howie, but I want to give you an opportunity, to give a shout out to folks. They need to come watch this softball team play. It's a very good team. It's a very entertaining product. It's a fast game, and I think folks will really enjoy it because the weather should start being very nice, and they're going to get to see some good softball because there's not going to be many blowouts from here on out. There's going to be some challenging games and going to be some exciting games.
Yeah, I mean, it's really cool that, like I said, I mean, Calhoun's they're in the top, they're in the 50s, based on the ranking deal that we had, which, again, that's out of 300 some odd teams. So that's a really good team we're going to play. You got Gadsden State that's, entered into the rankings this week. That's a really good team. Wallace State, is in the rankings again this year. They've always been in them. Our conference is good. So, I think every team has a winning record except for two. And those teams have not, shied away from playing, good competition. So it'll be challenging, going forward. And, we're definitely looking forward to it.
All right,
Coach, Coach, you're going to Calhoun Thursday. Right now we've got some storms coming through. How do y'all plan for that as far as if there's chance of rain or whatever? Do y'all go ahead and make that trip over there and just wait and see, or what? How would y'all take care of that?
It's just daily communication between us and, the other coaches. I got a good relationship with Denton over at Calhoun, and we just try to figure out, there's things that could flip around this week. The weather forecast is not a secret. It's definitely advantageous for us in the sense that we have a first class indoor, we've got a turf field. So, unless it is just really decimating us right at the time we're supposed to be out there, whether it's game, practice, camp, whatever, things don't get rained out a whole lot. So that's an advantageous thing for us. If something were to be soggy over there, we could flip dates, bring them over to our place and then, go over there. That gives us some flexibility. And, most of the teams in our league now, Gadsden has that capability. Shelton has that capability. Hansville has that capability. So I think you're seeing, with more teams, Shoals does, having the turf. It's a big investment up front, but man, it's worth it down the road for things like this for sure.
Is that why the schedule is made the way it is, having series with Calhoun at their place and then flipping around and coming to Northeast the next weekend?
No, that's a conversation unto itself. I can probably do a whole show on that, good and bad. I'm gonna save time and probably quit while I'm ahead on that one.
Yeah.
It's a little controversial, but yeah, that's not the sole reason. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
Coach, you kind of opened up the door there. It seemed like I kind of jabbed you a little bit. So let me ask you, how do you like playing a team one day, then 3 days later having to play them again?
I don't personally mind that. There are some coaches I've talked to, that don't like it because, like if you're rolling into a series, their argument is, I don't agree with this, but their argument is that, you're playing them 4 times in a row. So if you're playing well, it penalizes or it helps you. And, the other thought process is if you're playing bad, I don't know that I really buy into that. The thing that I don't like is the volume of it. I think that, I'll just speak from experience, in the SEC, we played 9 weeks with one bye week, which is the same thing we're doing here. Only, you're adding on a 4th game. And I can tell you from experience, like the SEC series, when you play them, it's like, it's just mentally grinding. I mean, even on the coaches, and obviously physically grinding for the players. And these players are not 23, 24 years old. And having to do that, I'm not a big fan of that. I'm also not a big fan of when we can only play 60 games and you got some leagues out there that are playing 40 conference games. I think from a development standpoint, it would serve us better. We used to do this, in this league and others where you had 40 non-conference and then another 20 conference. I think that makes more sense. You get some opportunities for some people going forward. we've shifted into what is more of a traditional NCAA model where, now we've got rankings committees and RPI and stuff that I'll be honest with you, I wish I'd left in Division I, but it's moving toward us. Some of it is positive because we're going to expand the tournament in a couple of years to where we've got 32 teams. I'm all for that. I think that's good, and it'll be regional sites and things of that nature, which I think will benefit the game. But for me, it's the volume of it, of what we're valuing in the season. I think it could be done better, in my opinion.
Cool. Phil, we're fixing to let this young man get off here. He's got a busy week ahead of him and got some storms coming through. So let's get off here. Everything's worked out pretty well so far. So let's try not to push it a little bit. So, Phil, you have anything else for Coach Guthrie?
Well, I'd like to ask one thing. We don't get to talk to Courtney much. For the most part, is she pretty well pleased with the pitching staff so far? Is everything kind of sort of falling into place? She really challenges that staff.
Yeah, I think she is. We're just trying to, we're always trying to improve. We're trying to do, get some developmental pitches, a little more consistent with some kids. Some of the ones that have had a lot of time, some of the ones that haven't. Just continuing to improve on that and continuing to improve on some sequences. If we can't establish, strike one, and we've done a really good job. I know one of the things we're pleased with is, throughout the staff, we haven't walked a lot of hitters, and with a defense like ours, that's going to give us a chance. So, as much as you hate to lose, we certainly didn't give away that game. The other day they earned it, and tip of the hat to those guys at Roan. And sometimes that's going to happen, but I'd much rather, if I'm going to wear an L, have that than if we just threw up on the field and a bunch of walks and errors happened. So, I think that's a testament to the staff. They give us a chance, and we played good defense behind them. So, that part of the game has been married up, pretty well. And yes, I'm pleased with where they are, but again, we've got to continue to get better for sure.
Yeah, and I think a perfect example of what you're talking about is Erin Harrelson. She'll give up some hits, but she don't walk folks. It seems like she's able to pitch out of bad situations. When you walk people, that's hard to do.
Yeah, I mean, she's she's done a really good job. I mean, a really good job this year on multiple ends, and when we can command the changeup, early in the count, that helps her other stuff kind of grow with the plate. And the clay we've got to work with, kind of making the pot, if you're using that analogy, is really good. I mean, she's real clean mechanically. She's one of those kids that, was fortunate to come to us that way. Didn't have to tweak a whole lot there. She's gotten in a lot better shape. And the changeup has allowed us to kind of, use some other things, to a better disadvantage, or, disadvantage to the hitter. So, I'm pleased with her, and because she's around the zone a lot, it makes our defensive movements a little bit sharper, because I don't really care how good your defense is if you're not throwing pitches into a location that is consistent, then we can't do anything defensively in terms of cheat. So she's definitely allowed us to do that, and we're pleased with that for sure.
Coach, we appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
Phil, did I cut you off? I'm sorry.
No. I just wanted to ask him about a little bit about the pitching staff to kind of sort of get Courtney's view just a little bit.
Yeah. So, Coach, we appreciate your time coming on. Best of luck this week on the trip to Calhoun and playing them as well. And as always, before we let you go, any shout outs you'd like to give before we end the show?
Yeah, I just appreciate, the support. The local community has been good. Dr. Campbell, it's very rare to have a president. I don't think he misses any inning. It's going to end up on, he's put on social media three things pretty consistently. Anything that Northeast does, and softball's been a big part of that. We had some, they were like pelicans, I think, that were migrating down here. He was hitting those up big time. And then he hit sunsets here recently, has been his thing. So it's nice to see us rank, really high on what he's doing. And, he's, I went to the soccer game the other night, the first one that we had out there, and he was there. I mean, just a great architect and supporter of all things Northeast. And, I think it's pretty rare. We appreciate everything that, John Allen Pope and Chad Gorham and Kip Williamson do. Those guys kind of rotate as game administrators for us. They do a fantastic job. We've got world-class police. Danny and those guys do a great job, there. And then Chris Peak with the bus. So I really appreciate, we've got some really, really, really top-notch A1 support here. And it's just a fun place to work every day. It really is. I mean, you look forward to coming to Northeast. And I can speak as somebody that teaches history and somebody that coaches softball, and very fortunate for that, for sure.
Well, sounds like Northeast has got everything under control right now, and got a big games against Calhoun this week. Let's see, Thursday and Saturday, I believe it is. On the road Thursday, at home Saturday, and of course the voice of Northeast, Phil Harris, will be there on Saturday doing his PA announcing. As he always says, he's got a voice for radio, or a face for radio and a voice for whatever. So anyway, I forgot what he said. It's been a long day, but anyway, Coach, thanks for joining us. So for Phil Harris, Howard Chaney, Coach Joe Guthrie, thanks for joining us from the Northeast Alabama Community College Softball Show. Go out and support the Mustangs this week, Thursday at 1 o'clock, I think, at Calhoun.
Yes.
And then, of course, Saturday, it'll be at 1 o'clock again, a doubleheader. You get 2 games for the price of 1. Can't beat that. So everybody go out and support them, and good night, everybody, and stay dry.